the town said nothing. Not because they didn't care, but because silence had always been safer. Lily and Jack Sullivan disappeared without a trace. And when the detective started digging, he unearthed what no one else wanted to touch. Missing GPS logs, delayed footage, bruises ignored, timelines that didn't line up. He saw a system failing. But what he didn't realize was that the silence wasn't just institutional. It was local. Neighbors had seen things. Teachers had written things. Social workers had warned about things. But none of it reached the surface. Not until one man refused to stop asking questions. Now slowly, the town is beginning to speak. Not with microphones or press releases, but in whispers, confessions, paper trails pulled from dusty drawers. This is the story of a community that watched, waited, and now remembers. And in those memories lies the proof that the detective was never chasing shadows. He was chasing what everyone else had buried. Before we dive into this, kindly subscribe to our channel if you believe in fighting for justice. We've just crossed 2,000 subscribers, all because of your support. And we need that same energy to reach 3,000, then 5,000, and then 10,000. So go ahead and drop your DNA on that subscribe button, because wherever you are, the day this vision is fulfilled, I will send my appreciation straight to you. Let's keep building this community that fights for justice together. It started with one phone call, then another, then a note slipped under a windshield wiper. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, almost ashamed. But it was enough. After months of dead air, sudden silence from agencies, and disappearing documents, someone finally broke the pattern. They didn't say much, just enough to let the detective know he wasn't the only one who had seen the cracks. The first voice was shaky. A woman in her 60s. She wouldn't give a name, but she remembered Lily, said she saw the girl once, standing barefoot in the middle of her driveway. Early evening, crying. She'd mentioned it to someone back then, a neighbor, maybe even an officer. But nothing came of it. I thought I imagined it, she said. But now I don't think I did. The next day, a letter appeared. No return address. Folded neatly. Left under the detective's wiper while he grabbed coffee. It was handwritten. 7 lines. No signature. That bridge was always the place they told us to stay away from. Even back then. Someone's lying. Please don't stop looking. Then came a voicemail. Then another. A boy, teenage, maybe 20, said he remembered Jack. Said he saw bruises too once. Said his mom told him never to mention it again. It's not our business, she'd said. We don't get involved. But now people were getting involved. Not because they suddenly found courage, but because something in them finally cracked under the weight of pretending they hadn't noticed. The detective hadn't gone public. There was no press release, no headline, but his questions had rippled. And now, without asking, the answers were starting to flow back. It wasn't the system opening its eyes, it was the people. And they were remembering things that didn't sit right. Things that never did. The shift had begun. Not from above, not from official hands, but from underneath. Quietly, organically. From a place called guilt. It didn't take long. Once the silence cracked, the memories began pouring through. The first real confession came from a woman who once worked inside the local elementary school. She didn't want her name mentioned. She didn't want to be seen. But she did want to be heard. And what she said stayed with the detective for days. I reported it. I filed an internal concern. Jack came in one morning with a bruise down his ribcage. He winced when he moved. I told the principal. I even filled out the mandatory incident sheet. 2 days later, I was pulled into a meeting. They told me not to escalate it. Let it go, they said. It's already being handled. But no one ever came to ask me a single follow-up question. She never saw a child protection officer enter the school. Never received an update. Eventually, she left the job. But Jack's eyes, wide, tired, and strangely accepting, haunted her. The second came from a man who lived just 2 doors down from the Sullivan home. He'd lived there 20 years. Never caused trouble. Never drew attention. But that changed the moment he called the detective. Saturday nights. That's when I'd hear her. The little girl. It wasn't every week, but it was often enough. Always around 9 p.m. Crying. Sometimes shouting. Sometimes it'd go on for 10 minutes. Sometimes longer. I told myself maybe she was just scared of the dark. But it didn't sound like fear. It sounded like pain. He had no recordings. Nothing provable. Just his memory. But it wasn't just one cry he remembered. It was the pattern, the consistency, and the way the sound always stopped suddenly, like someone had shut it off. Then came the message that changed everything. It arrived through a burner phone, one the detective never traced. The voice on the other end was older, male, professional. He didn't introduce himself, but he didn't need to. I used to work with them, the voice said. I saw the original file before it was changed. There were more photos, more statements. The GPS data near the bridge, it was there, but it was wiped before the public got access. Someone reclassified it. Someone above local command. He wouldn't say who, wouldn't give names, but he knew the language. He knew the file codes, and he knew the pressure points. This wasn't some conspiracy theory from an internet forum. This was from inside the system. Someone who had watched it get sanitized. And just like that, 3 voices broke through. A former teacher, a longtime neighbor, and a retired insider. None of them had spoken before. But now, their stories aligned perfectly with what the detective already suspected. The bruises weren't isolated. The crying wasn't coincidental, and the reports weren't lost. They were buried. And for the first time, the town's silence began to sound more like complicity. There's something strange that happens when people start remembering out loud. Fragments begin to align. Separate details, once dismissed as coincidence, start to form a picture no one meant to paint. One woman mentioned a jacket, pink, hooded, with a missing star-shaped sticker on the back. She said Lily wore it often. Always looked a little too small. She remembered it clearly because she gave it to the girl, left it on their porch in a bag of old clothes. Weeks later, she saw Lily wearing it on the way home from school. Another man, an elderly groundskeeper at a nearby park, called in after seeing the sticker on the news. He didn't understand its relevance at the time, but months earlier, he'd seen something stuck under a bridge plank about 20 feet from the dirt trail. A small, shiny metallic star. He assumed it was garbage, something a kid dropped. But now, as he said it aloud, he wasn't so sure. And then came the story of a woman who worked late nights at the only diner still open after 10 p.m. She remembered something odd. Daniel Martel, the stepfather, came in twice, both times on a Saturday. Both times with a black hoodie, pulled tightly around his face. The second time, he had mud on his boots. It hadn't rained in days. He just sat in the corner booth, she said. Didn't order food, just coffee. Stared out the window, seemed wired, nervous, like he was waiting for something. Her shift log proved the time. It matched the same weekend Jack had allegedly fallen off his bike, when the bruise showed up, and it lined up again with the trail cam timestamp, the one the RCMP delayed releasing for weeks. No one of these memories could have made a case, but together they told a different story. A girl with a pink jacket and a missing star. A sticker found under a bridge. A man with muddy boots and no alibi. A trail cam facing the wrong direction. And a community that had tried for too long to convince itself none of it mattered. The detective didn't ask them to find these details. They came on their own, and somehow that made it all the more damning. Because now, the story wasn't just about what was found. It was about what was remembered. And remembered too late. Once the first few confessions surfaced, the silence began to crumble faster than anyone expected. People who had never met, parents, teachers, foster volunteers, suddenly found themselves having conversations in grocery aisles, outside church doors, behind school fences. They weren't speaking in anger, but in quiet realization. Because what they were remembering wasn't just about Lily and Jack. One woman spoke of a child named Nolan, a foster boy who vanished from her school roster without explanation. She was told he moved out of province. But weeks later, his belongings were still in his locker. The folder on his case, gone. Digital access revoked. Another family recalled reporting suspected abuse in 2022. A 4-year-old neighbor, who screamed every night at the same hour. They made 5 calls. Only once did someone show up. Nothing came of it. A month later, the file status was listed as resolved, but no one had ever interviewed them. It wasn't just neglect, it was something more systematic. One retired local counselor described the bureaucracy like this: the process eats itself. When too many red flags show up in one district, they're told to slow the bleeding. That's not justice, that's optics. And then came the testimony that tore the air from the detective's lungs. A former social worker, young, once hopeful, sat across from him in a quiet cafe, hands trembling over a half-drunk cup of tea. "I loved that job," she said. "I believed in it. I wanted to help, but I burned out, not because of the kids, but because I was told, more than once, that some cases were just above me. I asked for follow-up on a girl who had bruises on her chest and was missing school repeatedly. I was told the matter was already resolved. When I asked why the bruises were never photographed, why the school never received a visit, I got silence, and then a warning: drop it." She handed the detective a USB drive. It wasn't official, she'd taken it with her when she left, terrified of what might get erased once her resignation was filed. Inside were dozens of screenshots, emails, closed report summaries, missing child entries, and one specific file from 2 years prior, a name the detective had seen before: Jack Sullivan. A file code marked Monitor, a designation meant for cases deemed low risk, but which would flag any future reports. But in Jack's case, it had been downgraded, then deleted. No follow-up, no home visit, no photos, just a system that had quietly swept it under. As more people compared their stories, the pattern became clear. This wasn't incompetence. It was procedure. Every broken call, every vanished report, every parent who tried, and every whistleblower who was told to stop, fed directly into the vacuum that let 2 children disappear without a single urgent alarm. And now, the community wasn't just validating the detective's theory. They were proving it had happened before, over and over, behind locked doors and silenced desks. At first it felt like clarity, a storm of details finally forming something solid. But the truth never settles gently, especially when it's been buried this long. As more confessions surfaced, the tone began to shift, no longer just facts and timelines, but grief, regret, shame. People started admitting what they remembered, not with pride, but with quiet, broken voices. A mail carrier confessed she once saw Lily sitting on the steps in the early morning cold, her face flushed and her socks mismatched. She assumed the girl had been locked out, but she told herself, "It's probably nothing." She kept walking. A teenage boy, now in college, remembered Jack crying behind the shed in the schoolyard. It happened more than once. He thought it was just a kid having a bad day, but he also remembered the bruises, and the way Jack flinched when someone raised their voice. There were dozens more. "I thought I saw something. I thought someone else would say something. I didn't want to cause trouble." The community didn't just fail the kids, they failed themselves. A local pastor, shaken by the mounting reports and unable to sleep, opened the doors of the Old Town Chapel. No sermon, no press, no live stream, just an invitation. The sign read, "If you need to talk, come." That night, nearly 30 people showed up. Farmers, teachers, grocery clerks. One by one, they sat in a circle, not to pray, but to remember. One woman admitted she lived across the street from the Sullivan home. She heard arguments, screaming, things breaking. She once saw a trash bag filled with children's clothes at the curb 2 weeks before the disappearance, and thought it odd that it was gone within an hour. A man broke down after admitting he threw out a crumpled notebook. he found on the trail near the bridge. He was hiking. He thought it was just litter. Later, when he saw the photo of Lily's drawings online, he realized the sketch style matched what he'd thrown away. These weren't criminals. These weren't officials. They were neighbors, regular people, and they were suffocating under a truth they'd ignored too long. Because now, there were no excuses. The signs were there. The sounds, the bruises, the silences, all of it. They just didn't connect the dots. And now, as the puzzle took shape in real time, what haunted them wasn't just the loss of 2 children, but the realization that they were close enough to stop it, and didn't. It began as a ripple. A handful of people trying to make peace with their own guilt. But in small towns, ripples don't stay quiet. What came next wasn't orchestrated. It wasn't led by officials or media or politicians. It came from the ones who were tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of pretending they hadn't seen what they saw. 7 parents, none of them related, none of them activists, co-wrote an open letter. It wasn't angry. It wasn't accusatory. It simply asked one question. If what we're learning is true, why hasn't this case been reopened? They published it online. Printed copies were tacked to trees, slid into mailboxes, taped to gas pumps. The letter spread within hours. One line stuck with people. We don't want to tear the town down. We want to build it honest again. The detective, silent through most of it, watched from the edges. He didn't need to lead anymore. The community was finally standing up on its own. Then came something unexpected. A leak from inside the school. A staff member, still anonymous, forwarded a photocopy to a local paper. A single journal page, written by Jack Sullivan just 2 weeks before the disappearance. It read, "Some nights I don't sleep because of the sound. It moves through the wall and into my pillow. I think if I hold Lily's hand, she won't hear it too. But I don't know how long I can keep holding on." The handwriting was unmistakably his. The words weren't just heartbreaking. They were prophetic. The school had never shared this. It had been quietly stored, flagged as a creative writing sample, until now. And then, almost impossibly, came the moment that changed everything. No signature, no message, just a manila envelope dropped through the church mail slot late at night. Inside a printed time-stamped document, the original copy of a CPS report, filed 8 months before Lily and Jack vanished. The name listed Daniel Martel. Allegation: repeated domestic disturbance, visible bruising on child, caregiver evasive, recommendation: in-person wellness check, status deleted. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't just negligence. Someone had gone out of their way to erase it. And now, the evidence was real, tangible, undeniable. The town could no longer pretend this was just a tragedy. It had become something darker. And for the first time since the case broke, the silence that once suffocated the town cracked open. There are stories that echo through courtrooms, others through headlines, but some are carved into the walls of a town's conscience. This one, it never needed to echo. It had been whispered in kitchens, covered by pillow talk, buried behind well-mowed lawns for years. The tragedy of Lily and Jack Sullivan was never just about disappearance. It was about recognition. Recognition of the things we all see and choose not to say out loud. Because when the detectives started digging, the town didn't hand him new clues. They handed him what they'd always had, and finally admitted was real. The bruises weren't hidden. The screams weren't faint. The coldness from Daniel Martel wasn't subtle. The system didn't just fail the children. It gave others permission to look away. The teacher who stayed quiet, the neighbor who muted the noise, the officers who followed orders to de-escalate. They weren't acting in isolation. They were part of something bigger, something woven into the fabric of communities that don't want to admit they know their monsters by name. It only took one man's refusal to stop, for the rest of them to start remembering. The detective didn't bring truth to this town. He reminded it that truth was already there, sitting behind locked doors, pressed into crayon drawings, stuffed inside manila envelopes, and shelved in forgotten filing cabinets. And now, there's no going back, no unreading the journal, No unhearing the confessions. No pretending that bridge doesn't exist. What happens next isn't just about an investigation. It's about accountability, both legal and personal. Because the question has never been what happened to Lily and Jack. The real question is, why didn't anyone stop it? If you think justice is a courtroom verdict, you haven't lived in a place like this. Justice begins the moment people admit they saw it all along and chose silence. So here's the truth, and it may not be easy. The system didn't bury Lily and Jack. The silence did, and if that doesn't change now, this story won't be the last. This is more than a case file. It's a mirror. So take a long look, because truth isn't what you uncover. It's what you admit you saw all along. Some confessions don't happen in courtrooms. They happen on paper, written in silence, sealed in shame. This one never made it to its recipient, but it didn't need it. It was discovered in a drawer, folded neatly, unstamped, undated. A teacher once responsible for Lily's second grade class wrote it after the media frenzy, after the missing posters faded, after the detective's findings were made public. She never mailed it. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she shouldn't. But now, someone else has. Dear Lily, I don't know where to start. You were just a child. 7, maybe 8. You always sat near the window. You liked to trace the condensation with your fingers when it rained. I remember thinking you were artistic, quiet, kind. But that day, when your stepfather came to pick you up early, you froze. You didn't cry. You didn't speak. You just flinched. I saw it. I remember it clear, as the chalk dust on my skirt. You flinched like you'd done something before. And I knew. Somewhere in me, I knew. But I turned to the board, pretended it didn't happen. They trained us to report bruises. They trained us to call social services. But they never trained us for that moment. The moment you realize you're scared of saying the wrong thing. So you say nothing at all. I'm sorry. I thought I was protecting my job. I was really just protecting my silence. And that silence cost you more than I can ever repay. The letter ends there. No signature. No date. No return address. Just a final line, scribbled at the bottom like an afterthought. If someone had spoken up then, would they still be here now? No one will ever know the answer. But one thing is certain, this wasn't the only letter never sent. In towns like this, silence is handwritten, folded, and filed away where no one looks, until it's far too late. In a town where everything whispers, loud truths have nowhere to live. But sometimes something shifts. It wasn't announced. There were no flyers, no posts, no live streams. Just a quiet text passed through trusted hands. Tonight, 7 p.m., Community Hall. No phones, no press. What happened that night was never meant to be recorded. But somehow, it still echoes. They came. Old men who hadn't spoken in years. Mothers clutching purses like they carried guilt in them. Teenagers who were children when Jack and Lily disappeared, and now remembered just enough to feel the weight. The first to speak was a woman in her 60s, former babysitter. She recalled once watching Jack fall asleep on the couch, only to wake up screaming when a loud knock hit the door. He said, "Don't tell him I slept," she whispered. I didn't ask who him was. A man followed, retired mechanic. He said Daniel Martel once brought in a dented SUV, reeking of bleach. No license plate on the front. Didn't think much of it then. Regret that now, he said. Then the stories started coming faster. A teenage girl remembered playing in the woods behind the Sullivan house. She swore she once saw Lily with a split lip. Said she thought she'd tripped on a brick. She smiled at me so I wouldn't ask.
Whoa.
The shop clerk said Jack once tried to buy 2 apples with 5 nickels. When she told him he didn't have enough, he said, "That's okay. I just need one for Lily." The father admitted he never let his kids sleep over at the Sullivan house. Now something didn't sit right. I couldn't explain it. Still can't. No one in that room had all the answers, but every voice carried a piece of something that, when stitched together, looked an awful lot like a truth they never wanted to face. Not a conspiracy, not a cover-up, just silence. Stubborn, fearful generational silence. By the end of the night, no one asked what had happened to Jack and Lily. They asked what had happened to them. Because when a community finally begins to speak, it has to ask itself why it ever stopped listening. The town never held a memorial. There were no balloons, no candlelight vigils, just one makeshift cross, hammered into the earth near a wooden bridge, and even that was gone by winter. The investigation isn't over, not officially, but the file has been closed, reopened, then shelved again under a different name. A name that feels more comfortable, less damning. Yet something irreversible happened. Not in the case, but in the town. The detectives' refusal to stop forced something loose. Not in the system, but in the people. It turned whispers into memories, regret into testimony, and secrets into something like justice. It didn't bring Jack and Lily home. It didn't put handcuffs on anyone. But it did something maybe more important. It made a quiet place speak. And now every Saturday, without fail, someone leaves a single item at the edge of that bridge. A toy, a flower, a drawing, a small star. No names, no signatures, just a silent promise. We remember now. This isn't just a story about two missing children. It's a story about the cost of looking away, about the damage we allow when discomfort keeps us quiet, and about what it takes for one voice, just one, to make a sleeping town begin to wake up. In the end, the question was never where are Jack and Lily. It's why did it take this long to care? The weight we live with is always heavier when we knew better.